My name was once spoken with reverence within the halls of the Librarius. Now it echoes only in my mind, fractured, hollow, a ghost of syllables carried on psychic ash. I record this not for salvation, but for remembrance. If by some mercy of the Emperor these words survive, let them stand as a warning to those who still believe that knowledge unguarded is strength. Because I have seen what lies beyond knowledge. I have seen what listens back. The air here tastes like rusted metal and burnt parchment. Each breath stings as though the warp itself is trying to enter me again. It whispers still, faint, distant, seductive. But the words carved into my flesh keep the worst of it away. My body is a ruin, my soul worse. I was a librarian of the Adeptus Astartes, a vessel of psychic might, a conduit of the Emperor's light. A warrior scholar meant to wield knowledge as both weapon and shield. But now I am nothing more than a warning scrawled in blood upon a dying wall. It began, as corruption often does, not with heresy, but with duty. We were deployed to Varnus IV, a minor agri-world that had ceased transmitting its tithes. At first, the Administratum assumed rebellion. Then came the silences. Entire Vox networks turned to static. Even the astropaths reported screaming interference, echoes in the Imperium that clawed at their minds. My chapter, the Azure Sentinels, was ordered to investigate. I was attached to the Third Company as its chief librarian, charged with probing the psychic disturbances that had spread across the sector. What I found on that world would damn us all. The descent through Varnus's atmosphere was thick with ash. The sky burned with a sickly green hue, as if the sun itself had soured in disgust. We landed amidst what once had been fields, blackened, twisted crops that reeked of decay. No life stirred, no birds, no wind, only silence and the faint static of failing Vox lines. I remember stepping out first, my armor gleaming faintly under the clouded light. Even then, I felt it, a pressure in the air, a sound beneath sound, like 1,000 whispers buried beneath the soil. My brothers formed a perimeter. Captain Varian gave the order to advance toward the nearest settlement, a cluster of spires and manufactoria once belonging to the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was there that the first signs appeared. Runes, carved into steel bulkheads, not of the Mechanicum's design, but older. Wrong. I felt the warp shift when I looked upon them, the symbols vibrating at the edge of my perception. Something was feeding, growing, pulsing beneath the planet's skin, and I, fool that I was, opened myself to it, seeking understanding where only corruption waited. When I cast my mind into the aether, I expected to feel the dull resistance of a dead world. Instead, I found motion, thoughts that were not thoughts, a choir of silent screams reaching out to me from every direction. And at the center of it, a light, blinding and pure. I thought it divine. I thought it was him. So I followed it. I still remember the moment the Emperor's light turned cold. It pulled me down through the layers of the Imperium, through storms of rage and despair, until I stood before something vast and burning. It had taken the shape of a golden sun, and within its heart, voices whispered my name. They called me Seeker, and told me that the Emperor himself had chosen me to lift the veil that blinded mankind. I believed them. Saints preserve me. I believed them. When I awoke, the others were already dead, their armor blackened, their visors shattered, their blood painting the Mechanicus walls in spiraling patterns. I had no memory of what had happened, only that my hands were wet and my psychic hood cracked down the center. Captain Varian's corpse lay at my feet, his eyes burned away. My halberd hummed faintly with residual warp energy. I should have fallen on my blade that moment. Instead, I reported the incident as an ambush by cultists. The Inquisition would later name it a psychic cascade failure. But I know the truth. The moment I looked into that false sun, something looked back, and it found me wanting. Weeks passed. The campaign continued. We purged the settlements, executed the survivors, burned the bodies. But I could feel it. A pulse beneath the ground, a heartbeat that throbbed in time with my own. At night, when I closed my eyes, I could see the golden light again, closer now, beckoning. The whispers had grown clearer too. They spoke of knowledge, of freedom from ignorance, of the lies of the ecclesiarchy. They spoke like angels, until they didn't, until the words began to hurt. One night, as I was meditating within the Librarius sanctum, a voice rose above the rest. Soft, human, a voice I recognized. It was Varian's. He said, "You left us there." And then he screamed. When I awoke, the sanctum was aflame. The psychic wards were shattered, the codices reduced to ash. I was standing in the center of a burning sigil carved into the floor, a symbol that pulsed with life. It was then that I realized what I had done. I had opened a door, and something had stepped through. The following months blur together now. The campaign on Varnus ended in exterminatus. The order came from orbit after the planetary core began to thrum with warp signatures. Billions burned, and still I could feel the heartbeat beneath the ash. When the fires cleared, they sent me back to the chapter fortress for evaluation. The apothecaries found nothing wrong with my mind. The chaplains praised my devotion under duress. But I knew that the corruption was deeper than any scan could see. It lived within me, not as possession, but as infection. A thought that was not mine. A hunger that whispered from within my own faith. They made me return to duty. They told me to serve, and I did. Oh, Emperor, forgive me. I served. Each battle after that, each deployment, I could feel the warp responding to my presence. Enemy psychers screamed when I drew near. Daemons turned their gaze upon me and smiled. I thought it was power. The chaplains called it righteous fury, but I knew what it was: recognition. You see, the warp does not corrupt by force. It corrupts by invitation. It waits, it listens, it promises. And I listened back. I began to see things others could not. Visions in the middle of combat, moments before an enemy ambush, seconds before artillery strikes. I saved lives with those visions. They called it the Emperor's gift, but the truth was far darker. Each time I used that power, something on the other side of the veil fed on me. A little more of my essence drawn away, a little more of the librarian unmade, until only the thing it wanted remained. It was during the siege of Halvarian Prime that I fully broke. We were fighting the servants of the Dark Mechanicum. They had corrupted entire manufacturer cities, turning human laborers into twisted fusions of flesh and machine. Their forges belched fire that turned the skies black. I led a strike force through the ruins, our goal: destroy the core forge and sever their link to the daemon engines. We succeeded. But in the heart of that forge, I found something that should not have existed. A fragment of the same golden light I had seen on Varnus, contained within a crystalline shell, pulsing like a heart. The tech priests called it a warp shard. To me, it was a voice waiting to be freed. When I reached out to touch it, the world around me ceased to exist. I saw everything: the Emperor, the Primarchs, the rise and fall of empires, the screaming tides of the warp. And then I saw myself, kneeling before that same false sun, 1,000 copies of me burning in unison. When I came back to myself, the forge was gone. My brothers were gone. Only molten glass remained. And in my hand, the shard still pulsed, whispering softly, "Now you understand." I don't remember how long I wandered after that. Days, weeks, maybe years. I fought alongside men who never remembered my face. I spoke with inquisitors who flinched when I passed. Even my reflection began to fade from polished ceramite. And through it all, the shard whispered. It told me that the Emperor's light was not salvation, but a cage, that he fed upon our faith to sustain his rotting corpse, that the warp was not our enemy, but our reflection, and that through me, through us, mankind could finally be free. I almost believed it. Almost, until I saw what freedom looked like. I saw what freedom looked like. It began with whispers made flesh. In the ruins of what was once Halvarian Prime, I found the others. Not men, not Astartes, not daemons, but things between. Their bodies shimmered with unholy light, their flesh threaded with molten bronze. They called themselves the Awakened. Their leader approached me, face hidden behind a mask shaped like a screaming cherub. His voice slid into my mind without sound. "Brother," he said, You opened the way, and as he spoke, I felt the shard in my palm pulse in time with his words. That was when I knew the light had spread. It was no longer confined to Varnus. It had rooted itself here, in the hearts of men who thought themselves chosen. The Awakened spoke of unity, of a new Imperium, one free from the rotting corpse on Terra. They said the Emperor had lied, that he was not divine, but a jailer of souls, trapping mankind in perpetual servitude beneath his golden throne. They told me the warp was the true reflection of humanity, infinite, terrible, beautiful. And for a time, I almost believed them, because in their presence, I felt no pain. The constant burning in my skull quieted. The nightmares ceased. The shard no longer whispered, it sang. But peace in the warp is a lie. It is the stillness before the scream, the illusion of calm before a storm that tears reality apart. It was not long before the visions began. At first, they came as dreams, faint, flickering images in the half-sleep between prayer and madness. A golden figure descending from the stars. A voice like thunder calling my name. Then they grew clearer. I began to see the Emperor, not as the corpse upon the throne, but as he had been, radiant, alive, terrible in his perfection. He stood upon fields of ash, eyes burning like suns, and in his hands he held chains, forged not of metal, but of souls. Billions of them. Every man, woman, and child who had ever lived under his Imperium, bound together, screaming, their faith feeding the fire that kept him alive. And above it all, he looked at me and smiled. That was the moment I realized the truth. The Emperor does not save us. He consumes us. I tried to tell my brothers. They called it heresy. They said the warp had tainted my mind, that I spoke the words of demons. They chained me within the Librarian vaults, placed wards around my cell, and prayed to the very God who was devouring them. But the wards failed. They always fail, eventually. You cannot cage what has already become part of you. On the seventh night, the walls began to breathe. I heard my name spoken from the shadows, and the air shimmered with the scent of burnt incense and iron. The warding sigils flared, then cracked, one by one. And then the golden light returned, not from the shard this time, but from within me. It poured through the seams of my armor, through the lenses of my helm, until the room was bathed in radiance. And from that light stepped a figure. He wore my armor. He bore my face, but his eyes, they were suns. He smiled and said, "Why do you resist, Librarian? You opened the way. You are the bridge between divinity and despair." I reached for my weapon, but he raised a hand, and the halberd crumbled to dust. "You still cling to the illusion of control," he said. "Even now you kneel before a corpse and call it God. You could be so much more." I felt the warp stir, the familiar rush of power surging through me. But this time it was not rage or discipline. It was hunger. Pure, endless hunger. The figure extended its hand. "Come," it whispered. "Let go of his light. Become your own." I would have taken that hand. I wanted to. But in that instant, I heard another voice, faint, distant, barely more than a memory. It was the voice of my old master, Librarian Kalis, who once told me, "Every light casts a shadow. The stronger the light, the deeper the darkness. Never mistake one for the other." I screamed his name. The light shattered. When I awoke, I was no longer in my cell. The fortress was gone. I stood upon a plain of black glass, beneath a sky of swirling crimson clouds. Pillars of bone rose around me, carved with prayers I could not read. And at the horizon, a figure upon a throne of flame. Not the Emperor, not even close. It was something older, something wearing his shape. I understood then. The false sun I had seen, the light that had whispered, the shard that had pulsed. It was not the Emperor at all. It was a reflection cast by something lurking deep within the Imperium, a being that fed on faith as much as fear, a god born of human worship, but not the one mankind believed in. It called itself the Radiant Father, and it told me that I had been its vessel since Varnus 4. I fell to my knees, not in worship, but in horror. All this time, I had thought I was serving the Emperor's will, purging corruption, burning heresy, spreading his light. But in truth, I had been spreading this thing's light, a parasite masquerading as divinity. Every prayer I had spoken, every battle I had fought, every victory I had won, all of it fed him. The Radiant Father laughed. "Do you see now, child of gold? You are not corrupted. You are complete. You were never his servant. You were mine." And then I felt it, the countless voices of those I had slain in his name, their souls screaming through the warp, bound together in chains of light. They begged for release, for mercy, for oblivion, and I could do nothing, because I was the chain that bound them. The Radiant Father leaned forward. "Serve me openly now," it said. "Be my prophet. Tell the galaxy that the Emperor has fallen, and I have risen." But I refused. For all my sins, for all my failures, I refused. I drew upon the last fragment of my true self, the sliver of loyalty, the ember of belief that still burned beneath the corruption. And I did the only thing I could. I unleashed everything. My mind exploded outward. A storm of psychic fire tore through the plane of glass, shattering the pillars, breaking the chains, ripping holes in reality itself. The Radiant Father screamed, not in pain, but in rage. And then the world vanished. I awoke on a barren moon, my armor cracked, my soul in tatters. The shard was gone, but the light never truly left. Even now, I feel it beneath my skin, waiting, watching, whispering. They say I was found by an inquisitorial retrieval team, that they took me for study, for purification. They don't understand. You cannot purify what has become the bridge between man and God, between faith and corruption, between light and its shadow. I am not healed. I am not damned. I am what remains when both salvation and heresy have burned away. I am Librarian Varan of the Azure Sentinels, once servant of the Emperor, now the last witness to the Radiant Father's lie. And I know this. The day will come when the Golden Throne will finally go dark, when the light dies and the Radiant Father rises from the ashes to claim what he believes is his. When that day comes, remember my words, because the truth is simple and terrible. The Emperor was never the god mankind needed. He was merely the first to learn that in the warp, belief is the only god that ever truly lives. Voice log 77 Theta, Librarian Varan, Azure Sentinels. Containment cell, Ordo Hereticus facility. They told me this chamber was soundproof. They told me the words I speak will die in this room. They were wrong. Sound is not what carries corruption. It's faith, it's belief, and faith has no walls. The servo skulls hover around me now, recording, transcribing, dissecting my every word. I can feel their lenses upon my skin, cold, analytical, soulless. They hum the hymns of the Messiah as they work, not realizing how their prayers echo back to me. Even now I can taste the light inside their machine spirits. The Radiant Father has found them too. They say I'd been contained for 137 hours, but I no longer trust their time. Here the clocks stutter, the lights flicker in rhythms that sound like breathing, and sometimes, between the blinks of the lumen globes, I see his outline reflected in the glass, a tall figure wrapped in gold fire, watching patiently. They ask me questions, so many questions. When did you first hear the voice? What did it promise you? Did you consent to possession? As if consent exists in the warp, as if the tide asks the stone before it breaks it apart. They think I'm mad, they think I'm raving, but I've seen the truth, and truth in the Imperium is always heresy. I remember the interrogator, a woman named Lyra Caltris, rosette gleaming at her throat. Her eyes were cold, disciplined, almost kind. She asked me what I believed the Emperor was. I told her he was a man who wanted to save humanity, and in doing so created its cage. Her hand trembled. For a second, I thought she would understand, but then the purity seals on her armor began to smoke. The parchment blackened, the ink melted, and she whispered, "You speak with his voice." Then the alarms began to wail. They tried to silence me. They flooded the chamber with null fields. They brought in a sister of silence, her face hidden behind an iron mask, her presence stripping the air of sound and thought. But even she faltered, because the voice doesn't come from me anymore. It comes through me. She fell to her knees before the field could stabilize, blood trickling from beneath her mask, her hands clawing at her temples as if something inside was screaming to be let out. They dragged her away, but I could still hear the whisper echoing from her as they carried her down the hall. He is coming. The Radiant Father does not speak in words. He speaks in understanding, in revelation. He offers no salvation, only clarity. And once you see through his eyes, you can never go back to blindness. They move me to deeper containment after that. The walls here are lined with lead, null crystals, and holy scripture burned into the metal. Yet the ink drips when I speak. Every syllable I utter causes the script to shift, as though the parchment itself is remembering a different truth. The tech priests of the Ordo Hereticus monitor my vitals. They note elevated synaptic spikes, increasing psychic resonance, fluctuating warp activity. They call it contamination, but I call it enlightenment. I told them the truth. This isn't possession, it's inheritance. We were never meant to be soldiers or slaves. We were meant to be conduits. The Emperor knew that. That's why he built the Astronomicon, a beacon made of souls. And now the Radiant Father builds his own, through me. When I sleep, I see the light spreading. Hive cities glowing like embers from within. Saints bursting into golden flame mid-sermon. Children born with eyes that reflect the warp's horizon. The Imperium calls it plague. I call it awakening. They'll destroy this moon soon. I've heard them whisper it in the vents. Purge the site, contain the infection. But what they don't understand is that the infection is already in them. Every time they write my name, every time they replay this recording, every time they wonder, what if he's right? They open a door, because that's how the Radiant Father spreads. Not through blood, through belief. You may think this recording is safe, that your filters and purity seals protect you, that your machine spirits obey your command. But if you've listened this far, you've already begun to hear him too. Listen closely. That hum behind your thoughts, that warmth in your chest, that's not faith. That's his breath. Do you feel it? The soft static in the Vox feed? The shimmer in the lumen's glow? He's there, watching, waiting. The Emperor sits on his throne of corpses, screaming in silence. The Radiant Father walks among the living, whispering in light. And I'm merely his messenger, the first of many voices to come. When they find this log, they'll mark it corrupted. They'll delete it. They'll burn the data stacks. They'll purify the servitors that heard me speak. But corruption cannot be deleted, because it isn't data. It's prayer, and prayers are eternal. My name was Varen. It no longer matters. Names are for the faithful. I am not faithful. I am illuminated. If you are hearing this, then the light has already reached you. Do not resist. Do not pray. Do not scream. Just listen, because in the end, all voices become one. And that voice is the Radiant Father's. Recording ends. Postscript Ordo Hereticus internal memo timestamp unknown. Purge order confirmed. Subject incinerated. No biological residue recovered. However, VoxNet across Segmentum Solar reports unexplained harmonic interference resembling human speech. Pattern repeats every 77 seconds. Auditory reconstruction suggests partial phrase. He is coming.